Hi, my name's Fran and I'm going to talk to you about photography basics from home. I'm going to talk to you about equipment. Here's some of the things that I've used. I didn't use all of them, but I used most of them. The white and black mount board that you can see, they're just basic art materials which are used to reflect and to block light. Really cheap, really simple. Most of these things you can get from Amazon and they wouldn't cost you very much money at all. The props that I've used are all a selection of things from my house that I've collected over the years. Things like dried lavender, which is from the garden. I've just bundled it up. This drawstring bag here, which I got from some shampoo that I bought from Amazon. Coasters, old packaging, things like that. A very important thing to consider is where you're going to set up. So I set up by my back door in my house here. There's lots of natural light, but I got it coming in from the left-hand side. Make sure you're not going to have to stand in front of it when you're taking photographs, because that will interrupt some of the light. For backgrounds you can use pretty much anything as long as it's the right colour and texture for what you need. And just making sure that it's really securely put in place is super important, because if it falls off it could then ruin your entire set. And this applies to foreground stuff as well. If you're going to put textures on the surface that you're photographing on, make sure that they are secure and taped down to the table. Now you can just use sellotape or duct tape or anything like that as long as it's strong, and if you don't need to see the edges of the image then it shouldn't really matter what you use to secure it. Also, don't be frightened of creases and things in paper. Don't think, oh, because I couldn't store this and keep it flat that it's no good. Sometimes I purposely scrunch bits of card up and then secure them to the wall, and that gives them a little bit more depth and a bit more texture to the image. Now going back to props, this bag, as I said, had shampoo in it. I've saved it. I've got a whole box of objects and things that I use. Now it's really important, if you're going to be photographing a lot of things at home, that you have props and things that you can use to build your set. Now I'd call it a prop box, and I keep packaging, bubble wrap and boxes and all kinds of things, jars and stuff that you just think, okay, that's going to have a purpose at some point, but I'm not really sure what for. Sometimes that can be exactly the thing you need to complete your entire setup. A great example of being resourceful and using the things that you've got around the house is this. This is a potato sack. I had bought a large sack of potatoes from a farm, and I saved the sack because it was a really good texture of paper, really good quality, and it's really malleable and has just a lovely colour to it. So I saved that. That's gone in the prop box. This could be used for the foreground or even for the background, it doesn't really matter. But it's just going to be very useful. Don't be afraid to experiment as well. The only way that you're going to learn what works and what you like is by playing with the objects that you have and the products that you're trying to photograph. Sometimes if you're photographing perhaps clothes and stuff, we can always think that it has to be on a model or that it has to be on a mannequin, when actually there's always going to be some creative way that you can highlight all the best bits of that product. Don't be afraid to get messy either. If it looks better because there's ink splattered everywhere, then splatter ink everywhere, but just make sure you've put newspaper down. When it comes to setting up your set as well, it's super important to think about the depth of your image. That will give it a lot more texture and it will really stand out, unless you want it to be flat, of course, in which case that's a completely different approach. But layering your set will help give you that depth. So if you haven't got a camera that's going to allow you to play with the settings and create that depth of field, you can do that visually with objects. So for my setup I chose the drawstring bag, which I stuffed full of plastic to make it look nice and full. I've got dried lavender, a selection of rocks that I collected from the beach, an old potato sack, some garden moss, a coaster which on the other side has pictures of flamenco dancers, so I've used it purely for one side of its texture, and a stick of pampas grass. Now you'll notice that all of these things are actually organic. They look like, that bag looks like it's made of hessian, and that's kind of the atmosphere that I'm going for. So always build your props around the theme also. As you're building your set, start photographing it, making sure that things are in the right place, because your eye will always look different to the camera's eye. And so you can do test shots on your phone if you like, but it's always best to do the test shots on the actual camera and the setup, because then you can sort of get the angles right and make sure that what you're seeing through the lens is how you want it to look. I'm going to demonstrate here how you can reflect the natural light that you've got coming in to sort of get rid of some of the shadows and stuff that you don't want. As you can see here, by using the whiteboard, I'm reflecting the light back from the window to get rid of some of the unwanted shadows. This mountain board's really useful because it's quite thick as well. It can stand up easily, so you can prop it up against things and it's not going to flop over like if you used a piece of white paper, for example. But if you have like a nice piece of card and some white paper, you can just stick it to it and it will essentially do the same thing. But these are very useful because they are also absolute white and they've got a slight finish to them which always bounces light back. Similarly, you can do the opposite but with a blackboard. So as you can see here, you can block in the light, you can create harsher shadows, and it just creates a little bit more depth. Now, when you're using your phone, it's sensible to have something for it to be attached to, like a tripod or something. So here we've got a snake that was just from Amazon. It costs about £10, attaches to any tabletop, so it's not even that it needs to have a tripod. You can have it on any surface essentially, and just have a play with the angles, get it in the right place. It doesn't matter what camera you have, you can definitely get some good quality photos out of it, but just make sure that you are checking the settings, playing with the light. Don't be afraid to use the settings that would be labelled as portrait mode or something like that. You can use them for whatever you like. It's all about making it work for you. I'm using an iPhone 11 here, which has a really good selection of settings. So again, just have a good play, and the more photos you take the better, because when you go back to things with fresh eyes, sometimes they look better than you thought they were. This brings me to editing on your iPhone. So let's say you don't really have any editing software, you can definitely play around here. So there's some filters that you can use, much like Instagram. You can play with the exposure and the brilliance, and all these different things might have different names to the technical terms for photography. But the best way to learn is to play. So just have a little explore, see what the settings do. Do they do what you want them to do? If your image is perhaps a little bit blurry, you can get rid of some of the noise, and you can make the shadows darker and stuff. So just really explore all the settings in there and see what works for your images. So here we're in Lightroom. If you have access to Adobe, there's a few little tips for you here. So always make sure that your white balance is set correctly. Now, to be honest with you, I think it depends on what look you're going for. If you want it to be warmer, then it will be on a different setting, but just have a look through them and that will give you the closest sort of truth to the exposure, I suppose. Once you've done that, you can just sort of play around with these settings here in the basics bit on the right. Now, what this gives you is the opportunity to play with the exposure, with the shadows and the highlights, and you can just really play with clarity and things to get those sort of details really sharp and standing out. Don't be afraid to crop your images, have a play around, like I said multiple times. It is about what works for you and what kind of look you're going for. Thanks for watching.